There comes a moment when your silence becomes louder than your pain, when your absence screams everything your words never could. You don't go quiet because you're weak. You go quiet because you're done bleeding for people who never cared to understand you. And sometimes, the most powerful response to disrespect isn't an argument, it's distance. Watch how your peace starts the moment you stop explaining. There comes a moment when you realize that not every battle deserves your energy. You could respond, you could defend, you could explain every corner of your heart. But for what? To be misunderstood again? To be talked over, twisted, or turned into someone you're not? It takes everything in you to stay quiet, to sit on your hands and hold back words that ache to be heard. But sometimes silence is the loudest boundary you can set. It's the way you say, I see what you did, and I will not entertain it. It's the way you keep your dignity when someone tried to drag you low. You choose peace not because you're weak, but because you're tired of bleeding your truth into ears that never wanted to listen. You walk away from the argument you could win because the cost of proving yourself is too high. There's a deep kind of pain that silence carries, one that no words can really explain. It's the lump in your throat when you wanted to say, that hurt me, but knew it wouldn't matter. It's the ache in your chest when you wanted to scream, I deserved better, but you knew the response would only cause more harm. So you go quiet, not because you don't have the words, but because you've said them too many times already. And each time you said them, they were ignored, laughed at, or used against you. So you stop talking, and in that silence, you finally hear yourself. You hear the truth that you matter, even if someone else failed to see it. And your silence becomes your protection, your protest, your power. You learn that you don't need to explain why you're hurt to the one who caused the wound. You don't need to offer them the roadmap back to your trust. If they cared, they would have walked gently in the first place. You don't owe your pain to someone who dismissed it. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of all. To love yourself enough to stay quiet in moments you once begged to be heard. To bite your tongue, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. To understand that silence is sometimes the most graceful way to leave what was never meant for you. You stop wasting breath on people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop shouting into voids that only echo your own loneliness back at you. There's power in knowing you can say everything and choosing to say nothing. Because silence doesn't mean you didn't feel it. It means you finally see through it. You see that not every insult needs a rebuttal. Not every lie needs a correction. You don't need to prove how deeply something hurt to validate that it did. The wound is real even if they pretend it isn't. The disrespect was clear even if they deny it. Your silence says, I'm no longer handing you the tools to break me. It says, this door is closed. And that kind of quiet comes from pain, yes, but it also comes from clarity. You finally see who they are, and more importantly, who you are. Silence becomes your sanctuary. It's the space you give yourself when the noise of disrespect gets too loud. It's where you go when you're tired of being strong in front of people who only take from your strength. You sit with the stillness, and in that stillness, you begin to rebuild. You pick up the parts of you that were scattered in every argument, every moment of trying to be understood by someone who didn't care to understand. You start to realize you don't need to explain why you left, why you stopped at talking, why you're no longer trying. Your healing isn't for their comfort, it's for you. And in that silence, you start to come home to yourself again. There is something sacred about holding your peace in a world that keeps trying to shatter it. You carry so much on your shoulders, and still you choose not to fight back in the way they expect. You choose calm over chaos. You choose stillness over screaming. That's not weakness, that's strength they will never understand. You stopped yelling because you realized your value doesn't need to be shouted. Your heart doesn't need to be proven. Your story doesn't need their approval to be true. You walk away quietly, and in doing so, you take your power with you. You stop giving them the satisfaction of a reaction, and that's where the real freedom begins. The silence might feel lonely at first, it might feel like you're invisible, but give it time and you'll see you're not invisible. You're just finally surrounded by your own voice. Not theirs, not their insults, not their excuses, just you. And maybe that's what you needed all along. To get quiet enough to remember how it feels to breathe without defending yourself, to feel without guilt, to exist without shrinking. Silence has a way of bringing you back to life, not the version of you they tolerated, but the real you. The one that never needed fixing, the one that only needed peace. You'll look back and see that the most powerful thing you ever did was choose not to respond. Not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much for yourself. That moment you didn't react, that was growth, that was healing. That was you reclaiming your narrative without a single word. Silence is not avoidance. It's not running away. It's choosing not to fuel fires that were never yours to put out. You let them burn their own bridges. You stop trying to carry relationships built on broken respect. And in doing so, you build something stronger within yourself. Every time you chose silence instead of arguing for your worth, you were teaching yourself how to be free. Every time you didn't explain why something hurt, you were telling your soul, I trust you. You were walking away from noise, from chaos, from confusion, and walking into clarity. You didn't lose your voice. You just stopped wasting it. And now your peace is louder than their opinions. Your silence is your boundary. Your stillness is your strength. And that is how healing begins, not with a scream, but with a whisper that says, no more. If you ever doubt the power of silence, remember this, it saved you. Not because you didn't have more to say, but because you finally knew you didn't need to say it. You let your quiet speak the truth no argument ever could. You let the silence be your armor, your closure, your shield. And in that choice, you found something no disrespect could take from you, your self-worth. They don't get to rewrite your story. They don't get to narrate your pain. You do. And sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever write is written in silence. Sometimes the most painful thing you'll ever do is choose distance from someone you deeply cared about. Not because you stopped loving, not because you gave up, but because you realized your heart was breaking in silence every time you stayed. It hurts to walk away, especially when your soul once felt safe there. But it hurts more to keep shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's comfort. You get tired of asking to be seen, of begging for the bare minimum, of staying where you're constantly disrespected. And when that ache becomes louder than your fear of leaving, you go. Not with anger, not with noise, just a quiet goodbye that no one sees coming, a goodbye that only you understand. There's a grief that comes with choosing yourself. It doesn't always look like strength in the beginning. It looks like crying at night because you miss the version of the connection you hop. Ed 4. It looks like second-guessing your worth because you were made to feel like too much and not enough at the same time. You sit in your room with memories playing in your head like they're on repeat, wondering if you could have done something different, but then you remember the countless times you explained how you felt. You remember the disrespect, the dismissals, the cold silence that followed your vulnerability, and you realize this distance isn't punishment, it's survival. People think distance means you don't care, but they never saw the war inside you. They didn't hear the way your voice cracked when you tried to speak your truth. They didn't feel the way your chest tightened when you were ignored or minimized. Choosing to walk away isn't about revenge, it's about choosing your sanity. It's about preserving what little pieces of yourself you have left after pouring them out for someone who never noticed. It's about giving up the need to be chosen by someone who made you feel like an option. And that kind of decision comes from deep, heartbreaking strength, the kind that no one claps for, the kind you have to carry alone. You don't owe closeness to people who disrespect your heart. You don't owe loyalty to those who keep tearing holes in your spirit. Love is not supposed to feel like a battlefield where you lose yourself trying to win them. You shouldn't have to explain why you need kindness. You shouldn't feel guilty for needing consistency. And yet, for so long, you convinced yourself to stay because you thought love meant patience. But it also means boundaries. It means self-respect. It means knowing when enough is enough, even if your heart still beats for them. Distance, in this case, is not a wall, it's a lifeline. Some people only understand your value when they feel your absence, but by then, you've already cried the tears they'll never see. You've already cleaned up the mess they never admitted to making. You've already done the hard part, realizing that staying is costing you. Your peace, and peace isn't something you can sacrifice for love anymore. Not after what you've endured, not after the way you were left to carry the pain alone. So you create space. You step back, not because you stopped loving, but because you started loving yourself more. And that shift is where everything begins to change. At first, the distance feels unbearable, like you're being torn in half between what you feel and what you know. Your heart says stay, your soul whispers leave, and the silence in between those two voices becomes deafening. But with time, that silence softens. It becomes comfort instead of chaos. You start to breathe again. You start to sleep without carrying the weight of confusion. You begin to see that the pain wasn't coming from the distance. It was coming from what you kept trying to hold on to. And letting go, though painful, was the beginning of your healing. You stop waiting for apologies that never come. You stop hoping that one day they'll finally understand. Because the truth is, if they cared enough, they would have tried when they still had access to you. They would have valued your tears when you cried in front of them. They would have listened the first time you said, That hurt. So you let the silence speak now. You let your absence be your answer. Not to punish them, but to protect yourself. To say, I deserve better without having to say it out loud anymore, because you've said it enough and it's time to live it. There's a beauty that comes from healing in private, from slowly unlearning the belief that you had to stay to prove your worth. You begin to remember who you were before the disrespect made you question yourself. You start to rebuild the parts of you that were chipped away by constant emotional bruises, and with every passing day of distance, you get closer to yourself. The version of you that doesn't have to tolerate pain just to feel loved. The version that doesn't confuse chaos for passion. You begin to realize you were never hard to love. You were just trying to be loved by someone who didn't know how. Choosing distance is hard when your heart is soft. You're the kind of person who forgives too much, stays too long, and hopes too deeply. But at some point, even soft hearts learn that love is not meant to be proven through pain. You can love someone and still walk away. You can miss someone and still choose yourself. That's not being cold. That's being brave. Because it takes courage to leave when your heart wants to stay. It takes strength to love from afar when closeness only brings harm. And that's the quiet power behind distance. It's love choosing to live where it's safe. You don't need to justify why you created space. You don't owe anyone a breakdown of your heartbreak. The decision to walk away from disrespect isn't something that can be explained to someone who never valued your presence. It's something sacred, something only you and your healing understand. You don't carry bitterness, you carry wisdom now. You've learned that being close to someone who constantly hurts you is not loyalty, it's self-abandonment. And you're done abandoning yourself. The distance you chose wasn't about them, it was about finally coming home to the one person who needed you most. You. They say you've changed, that you've become quiet, cold, distant. But what they don't see is everything you had to endure to become this version of you. They don't know how many times your voice cracked while asking for the same respect, how many nights you cried in silence because your heart was carrying more weight than it should. They don't know how exhausting it is to explain your worth to someone who only listens to respond, not to understand. So no, you're not cold, you're healing. You're no longer handing out explanations to people who never valued your voice. You're no longer softening your truth to protect someone else's comfort. You're not bitter, you're just done begging to be treated like you matter. And now, the silence they call coldness is actually the warmth you've kept for yourself. There's a version of you that used to overthink every word, every pause, every moment of disconnection. You used to chase clarity in conversations that only gave you confusion. You used to ask, what did I do wrong? When the truth was, you were giving too much to someone who gave too little. You were pouring into a space that never had the intention of holding you. And in the process, you began to feel invisible in the very place you thought you'd be safe. So now you don't speak as much, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're tired of speaking into silence. You're tired of your vulnerability being a target. You've learned that peace isn't found in being heard, it's found in being free. You were once the person who would fight to keep people close, even if it meant fighting yourself in the process. You used to believe that if you just loved harder, stayed longer, tolerated more, maybe things would get better, maybe they'd see you, maybe they'd care. But all it did was drain you. All it did was make you question your value. You gave chances, explanations, forgiveness, and each time, you lost a piece of your own soul. Until one day, there was nothing left to give but silence. And now, that silence is misunderstood. They say you're distant, unbothered. But you're not unbothered, you're exhausted, and you're finally choosing to breathe without defending why you deserve to. You don't explain your pain anymore, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've learned it's not your job to teach someone how to care. You've cried in spaces where you should have been comforted. You've been blamed for being too emotional when you were simply asking for respect. And you've stayed longer than you should have because you were still hopeless. Nung, they'd see your heart. But hoping doesn't heal. Hoping doesn't change patterns. So now, instead of hoping they'll change, you've decided to heal. And healing doesn't always look soft. Sometimes it looks like distance, sometimes it sounds like silence, and sometimes it means being called things by people who never saw your soul in the first place. You remember what it felt like to be the one who always cared more, to be the one who stayed up wondering why things suddenly felt different, why affection turned into absence, why warmth turned into cold avoidance. You asked questions that were never answered. You sat with confusion wrapped around your chest like a weight. And no matter how calmly you tried to express it, your pain was always too loud for their comfort. So eventually you turned that pain inward. You stopped asking. You stopped reaching. You stopped explaining. And in that quiet breaking, you found something you never expected to find: yourself. Healing doesn't always feel good. It often starts with isolation, with walking away from people who don't understand why you've changed. It means letting go of the need to explain your silence, your distance, your boundaries. It's accepting that not everyone will know the war you fought just to be able to smile again. And you're not the same person who stayed quiet just to keep the peace. You're not the same heart that tolerated being overlooked. Now, you sit in your stillness, and while others may call it cold, you call it safe. Because your healing doesn't look like what they expected. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's soft, quiet, and strong in ways they'll never see. They don't understand that healing isn't always about moving on with joy. It's about picking up the pieces of yourself that you were forced to abandon. It's about facing the moments when you were made to feel small, unworthy, dramatic, or too sensitive. It's about forgiving yourself for staying too long, for explaining too much, for giving too deeply to someone who never knew what to do with your love. And when you finally start to rebuild, it's not with noise, it's with silence, it's with reflection, and it's with the promise that you will never again let someone make you question your worth just because they couldn't see it. You stopped fighting for space in someone else's world. You stopped asking to be heard in rooms where your voice was never honored. And you stopped trying to prove that your heart was enough, because it was always enough. It was just given to someone who didn't know how to hold it. So now your healing looks like walking away without slamming doors. It looks like saying nothing, not out of indifference, but out of wisdom. Because you finally understand that not everyone deserves access to your emotions. Not everyone is safe with your softness. And not everyone is capable of loving you the way you deserve. It's not that you're emotionless now. It's not that you've hardened. It's that you've finally set boundaries where there used to be open wounds. You've turned the volume down on external noise so you could hear your own soul speak. And it's telling you that you're worthy, that you are not too much, that your love is not a burden. The silence you carry now is sacred. It's not the result of bitterness. It's the result of a long, painful journey back to yourself. A journey filled with lessons, heartbreak, and the quiet decision to no longer settle for half-hearted love. You may never get the apology, you may never hear the words you needed, but you have something better now. You have peace. You have the clarity that comes with no longer begging. You have the strength that only comes from healing in silence. And while they may call it cold, only you know how much warmth it took to get here. You didn't go silent because you stopped caring. You went silent because you finally started caring for you. You finally realized that your healing is not about being understood by others, it's about being honest with yourself. And that kind of honesty is the loudest truth you'll ever live. There is a silence that says more than 1,000 words ever could. It's not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of someone who has finally had enough. The silence of a heart that has been stretched, bruised, and broken so many times it learned to beat without needing noise. You don't raise your voice anymore, not because you're indifferent, but because you're done wasting breath on people who never truly listened. You've stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped reaching. Now your absence speaks for you. It speaks the pain you carried, the disappointment you buried, and the love you gave that was never held right. You no longer try to fix what was never yours to fix. You let go, not with anger, but with quiet strength. And in that silence, your soul finally exhales. You used to believe that love meant staying even when it hurt. That loyalty meant enduring even when it felt like dying inside. You gave chance after chance, hoping that maybe this time it would be different. You cried quietly so no one would call you dramatic. You swallowed your pain just to keep the peace. But over time, the silence you used to protect others began to consume you. You realized that your presence was taken for granted, that your kindness was mistaken for weakness. So one day, without warning, you stopped showing up the way you used to, not to hurt anyone, but to save yourself. And now, your absence echoes in spaces where your love used to live. They will feel it, not immediately, not loudly, but deeply. In the way the room feels colder without your warmth. In the way the silence sounds different now that your voice is gone. In the way their days pass without your messages, your check-ins, your gentle reminders that you cared. You were never loud about your love, but it was consistent, it was steady. And now that it's no longer there, the stillness becomes deafening. The absence, why? I'll leave behind doesn't scream, it lingers. It shows up in the quiet moments, in the small routines that used to hold your presence. They may not say it out loud, but they feel it, because losing someone who loved with that much depth always leaves a shadow. You stopped explaining why you needed to be respected. You stopped asking for clarity, for honesty, for effort, because every time you asked, you were met with silence, excuses, or just enough to keep you hoping. And that kind of love, the kind that only shows up when it's convenient, is not love at all. It's confusion dressed as comfort. It's manipulation hiding in mixed signals. So you removed yourself, quietly, fully, and in doing so you gave the loudest answer you ever could. You chose yourself, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving you. And that choice, though heavy, was necessary. There is nothing colder than being surrounded by someone and still feeling alone. You learned this the hard way. You smiled through the ache. You showed up even when you were breaking inside. You made excuses for their neglect, telling yourself they were just going through something, but in reality, they were showing you who they were all along. You just didn't want to see it. So when you finally disappeared, it wasn't sudden. It was the result of being slowly erased, day after day, moment after moment, until one day you realized you weren't even in the picture anymore. You were just a background presence, and that realization shattered you, but it also set you free. There's a power in choosing silence when your heart wants to scream, in walking away when everything inside you wants to stay. That's the kind of strength people never see. They only see the absence, not the journey it took to get there. They don't see the sleepless nights, the inner battles, the tears behind closed doors. They don't understand the courage it takes to leave without slamming the door. To choose dignity over drama, to choose peace over chaos. But you do. You know what it cost. You know what it took. And that quiet exit will echo far louder than any angry words ever could. They'll scroll past your name, wondering why it suddenly hurts to see it. They'll hear your favorite song and feel a knot in their chest. They'll go to tell you something and realize they can't. And in those moments, your absence will speak. It will whisper all the things you tried to say, all the ways you tried to stay. Your silence will become their memory. And while they sit with the void you left, you'll be rebuilding in silence. You'll be rediscovering yourself without needing their validation. You'll be healing in a place they no longer have access to. And that right there is your quiet revolution. It's painful to outgrow people you still love, to realize the version of you that they needed was the one who didn't love herself enough. You look back and see the warnings you ignored, the boundaries you never set, the parts of yourself you gave away for free, and still you don't hate them, you don't wish them harm, you just wish they would have valued what they had before it turned into silence. But wishing doesn't change the past, and love without respect isn't love that can survive. So you mourn what could have been, and then you move forward. Not because you're over it, but because you finally know you deserve more than what you settled for. Sometimes, the most powerful form of closure is nothing at all. No message, no final explanation, no attempt to be understood, just distance, just silence, just the choice to stop giving energy to what kept draining you. It's not petty, it's not immature, it's healing. It's creating space for the kind of love that won't make you beg. It's protecting your heart from ever being treated like an afterthought again. And even though it hurts, you keep walking. Even though your chest aches, you keep breathing. Because you know that silence doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're finally whole enough to walk away. You're not heartless, you're not cold, you're not unfeeling. You're someone who loved deeply and got tired of bleeding in silence. You're someone who finally realized that respect isn't something you should have to ask for repeatedly. You're someone who now knows that presence should be mutual, not one-sided. And so you let your absence speak the truth they refuse to hear. Not to hurt them, but to honor yourself. And as you walk away in silence, you carry one truth with you. Sometimes the loudest message is saying nothing at all,